Hello, my name is James Reinars, and welcome to another research nugget into the life of Margaret Emma Barber. I've been looking into the magazine called the Overcomer magazine, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the history of that magazine and the influence it had on Margaret Emma Barber. So firstly, we would just say, in the last decades, 1909 to 1930 of her life, Margaret Emma Barber received, read, wrote letters back to, and even contributed to this magazine, the Overcomer magazine. This magazine was published, edited by Jesse Penn-Lewis, in a lot of collaboration with a man named Evan Roberts. And the fellowship and group and deeper ministry coming from this magazine and around this magazine was a source of community, identity, supply to Miss Barber, especially in the last years of her life. And it's something that Watchman Nee found in volumes on her bookshelf. And he draws from things from all parts of the 20 years of the magazine. So it was something he saw from her and something that influenced Watchman Nee as well. Now, a few things about the history of it. Jesse Penn-Lewis began ministering really in the same year that Miss Barber went to China. That's 1896. The women are about the same age. Miss Barber went to Fuzhou in 1896. Miss Barber began preaching and writing in a public ministry in that same year, 1896. But what really launched Jesse Penn-Lewis's ministry into kind of international notoriety is that she wrote a short book called The Awakening in Wales that captured the history of the 1904 Welsh revival. She was an eyewitness to some of it, and in the next year, 1905, wrote and published a tiny little book coming right on the wake of the revival. Many people around the world, in the English-speaking world, were eager to find out what happened, especially from an eyewitness. So her little book was just eaten up by people, published and bought all over the world, and quickly her name became much more of a household name and someone associated with the Welsh revival. A few years later, 1909, Miss Penn-Lewis and Evan Roberts was a prominent speaker, minister in the Welsh revival of 1904. Them two together would start this magazine, the Overcomer magazine. And it was a way to connect internationally with an audience seeking a deeper experience of the cross, a deeper fullness of the Holy Spirit, and to learn the ways of revival. That was their kind of mission in the first years of the magazine. The Overcomer magazine would begin in 1909. This is right in the year that Miss Barber herself would return to Fuzhou for the second time. In the years before, she had returned to England, kind of shoved out of her Anglican mission. She would leave the Anglican Church, but then feel really clear that she was called by the Lord to minister and preach the gospel back in Fuzhou, China. So in 1909, she returns, just as this magazine is starting up. Now, we don't quite know if Miss Barber ever met Jesse Penn-Lewis or how she heard about the magazine. It's very likely that she heard about this from or because of her connection to D.M. Panton. D.M. Panton was an early contributor to the Overcomer magazine. He has a couple articles in 1909, a couple articles published in 1910. So there's some relationship, some connection there. We know that she was reading it at least by 1910, because in May of 1910, on the very first page, there is a poem published, one called We Which Live, and the author has just three initials at the bottom, M-E-B, and it says, in parentheses, China. So very likely that this is Margaret Emma Barber, and because of the presence of her writings or letters later in the magazine, we should be pretty confident that this is her poem. What's interesting is that this good little poem, We Which Live, was not published in the collection of her poems and hymns called Verses of a Pilgrim that was published when she died in 1930. So we really only have this hymn, this poem, because it's in the Overcomer, preserved for us in the magazine. It's a good example of a poem of hers that was kind of lost, and it's metered. It could be turned into a hymn. It could be sung with a variety of tunes, and it could be a good thing to have not just as a poem, but as a hymn. A link to that poem is in the description. Maybe at another video we'll dig into it a little bit, talk about what it says and how to sing it. But it's evidence that early on she was taking in the magazine, appreciating it, wanting to contribute and be a part of the community created by the magazine. And this is something that was on her bookshelves when Watchman Nee met her about a decade later. And we'll talk more about that influence as time goes on.